Welcome to episode 247 of The Brainy Business, Understanding the Psychology of Why People Buy. In today's episode, I'm excited to introduce you to Dr. Dolly Chugh, author of A More Just Future. Ready? Let's get started.
You are listening to the Brainy Business Podcast, where we dig into the psychology of why people buy and help you incorporate behavioral economics into your business, making it more brain-friendly. Now here's your host, Melina Palmer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melina Palmer, and I want to welcome you to the Brainy Business Podcast. In today's conversation, I'm joined by Dr. Dolly Chugh. Dolly is a social psychologist and management professor at the New York University Stern School of Business, where she teaches MBA courses in leadership and management. Dolly is well known for her teaching and facilitation skills. She was one of 6 professors chosen from thousands at New York University to receive the Distinguished Teaching Award in 2020, and one of 5 to receive the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Faculty Award in 2013. Her research focuses on bounded ethicality, which she describes as the psychology of good people. Her work has been published in the leading psychology, economics, and management journals and cited by many books and authors. Her first book, The Person You Mean to Be, How Good People Fight Bias, which came out in 2018, has received praise from Adam Grant, Angela Duckworth, Liz Wiseman, Billie Jean King, and many others. It's been covered on The Today Show, The Wall Street Journal, The New York Times, The Atlantic, The 10% Happier Podcast, The Goop Podcast, NPR, and other media outlets. Her TED Talk was named one of the 25 most popular TED Talks of 2018 and has almost 5 million views. She has a popular newsletter, Dear Good People, offering bite-sized, evidence-based, zeitgeisty tips on how to be the inclusive person you mean to be. And yes, it's linked for you in the show notes. Her most recent book, A More Just Future, Psychological Tools for Reckoning with Our Past and Driving Social Change, is the main focus of our conversation today. Prior to becoming an academic, Dolly worked at Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch, Sibson and Company, Scholastic, and Time Inc. Dolly attended Cornell University, where she majored in psychology and economics for her undergraduate degree, and Harvard University for her MBA and Ph.D. Quite the resume for quite the person. And of course, a big thank you to Katie Milkman for the recommendation and introduction over to Dolly. As you're going to hear about in the episode, this is a really personal one for me that hits home for a reason that I haven't really talked about much on the show. Hopefully, it's well received and you understand why I brought it up today and why I intend to talk about it more into the future. Also, I know this topic is heavier than a lot of what we talk about on the show, but it's important, which is why I asked Dolly to join me to talk about her book. It isn't easy stuff to hear or read about. That doesn't mean we shouldn't experience it. So I hope you go into today's episode with an open heart and an open brain. Before we get into everything, I want to be sure you know there are links in the show notes for everything, including Dolly's books and contact information and related past episodes, all within the app you're listening to and at thebrainybusiness.com/247. Now let's jump right in. Dr. Dolly Chugh, welcome to the Brainy Business Podcast.
Oh my gosh, it's great to be here, Melina. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I'm so excited. And as I think always happens, and I end up saying here, is we had a pre-chat that could have lasted days and I had to cut us short because we have to make sure there's so much that we can be talking about and that we are going to talk about in the interview and conversation today. And I want to make sure everyone gets to be a part of it. And we get to catch up in person at South by Southwest when we're both speaking there in March, which will definitely talk about what you're going to be talking about there in the conversation. And for everyone who doesn't yet know you, can you share a little bit about your background and your work and who you are and what you do?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. And I am excited for us to experience South by Southwest for the first time together. Again, my name's Dolly Chugh. I'm currently a professor at the New York University Stern School of Business. I teach courses in management and leadership, and my research focuses on what I call the psychology of good people. I'm sure we'll have a chance to dive into that. Prior to becoming an academic, I was in the corporate world. I started my PhD at 33. From ages 21 to 33, I was in the corporate world in jobs in investment banking and consulting, and I have an MBA as well. Undergrad, I double majored in psychology and economics, which I think is deeply relevant to what you're doing here and what your listeners are interested in, because there was no field called behavioral economics, and I didn't know that's what I was interested in. I just found those two areas interesting, psychology and economics, independently. Bob Frank was one of my professors at Cornell University. He would, of course, go on to be one of the most interesting voices, I think, in the early stages of behavioral economics. Sendhil Mullainathan was 3 years behind me, junior to me at Cornell University. That's how early it was in the field. Richard Thaler, I don't think had arrived at Cornell yet, at least I didn't know him. So yeah, I don't want to take credit for the whole field, but maybe I will.
Why not? Love it. Love it. Love it. And yeah, such a common story of I was looking for the thing and I like this and people told me they didn't go together, but I knew they had to go together, right? Right?
Yes. I distinctly remember senior year of college going to all these interviews, for my first full-time job. And I can like picture it, people holding my resume back in the days of paper resumes, holding my resume and being like, I don't understand this double major, and me being like, no, it makes total sense. It's both about human behavior. And
people say, no, that doesn't fit. What do you mean? Yeah. And everything fits, I think, right?
Oh.
Whatever. I love that aspect of the field, honestly, that everyone has such diverse backgrounds and the awareness and the connections within the brain that kind of brings to the way that we talk about things. And you think about something like choice architecture. I mean, I don't want to say that it wouldn't have happened or couldn't have been possible without this sort of diverse background, but this thought process and, mutual friend, Katie Milkman, and her degree is in engineering, I believe.
Yeah, undergrad. And even her PhD, I don't want to misstate what it is, but it's not what you think it would be. It's like applied computer science or something. Right. I mean, I'm probably getting it wrong, but it's not what you would think it would be.
Right. And I think it is just so powerful as we're, building this field together. And human behavior is all the things, right? We need all the things in there. So I love that it's this kind of melting pot of experience and background, which I feel like is kind of a perfect backdrop going into your new book, A More Just Future. And as you look at this book, you say in there that you're not a historian and yet found yourself in this space of really digging deep into history. And I want everyone to know we are going to talk about we intend to talk about how this ties in to business, specifically in things that businesses can be keeping in mind. And this is just a really important topic when we're looking at, businesses are made up of humans, regardless of what we want to think. And even if you have AI doing something in your company, you're selling to humans, you have humans on your teams, in your C-suite. It's all about people at the end of the day and human behavior. And so this all matters regardless of how much we talk about it from what to do inside of a business. So with that caveat, can you share a little bit about, I guess, how the book even kind of came about as you started that process?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the book, I would say if I had to pinpoint a moment of genesis, it was, as many things are, a moment of smugness, or maybe even a year of smugness as a parent, where I had been reading to my kids who were sort of like 6, 7 years old, 2 children. And I was reading to them every night from the Little House on the Prairie book series. And I was very proud of this commitment I had to reading to them every night. Like, didn't matter, no matter what, we made it happen. And we were reading, these long chapter books that were written by Laura Ingalls Wilder as a sort of autobiographical account of her family in the 1800s. And it's an 8-book series, about 200 pages each book. It took a full year. And my husband and I then decided to take our kids on a family vacation to South Dakota and Minnesota, which is where the land where they were building the little house on the prairie. And we went and saw all the places they're not super touristy, but they are marked. And there are ways to sort of immerse yourself a little bit in the world that Laura and her family lived in. And so here we were on the prairie and like big blue prairie sky. It was just an amazing kids in prairie dresses, which they wore at their own insistence all week, like literally all week. So we were feeling pretty good about ourselves at this moment. And I remember standing on the prairie and suddenly being like, wait a minute, whose land was this before the Ingalls family were? I mean, the 1800s, somebody was here before that. And like, it's sort of Captain Obvious, but like, yes, somebody was here. Millions of people were actually here. And those millions of people were driven off this land through the colonizing forces that benefited the Ingalls family. And, the genocide, and people view that word as strong, but the historical accounts I've read, that's how they describe the genocide of Native Americans that has sort of went on for a long period of time, and then led to other ways of sort of minimizing or actually kind of like squashing the culture of those families. Even in modern day, even people who are alive today can recall being sent away from their families into these residential schools where they weren't allowed to speak their native languages or see their families. This whole process that I'm describing was not at all in my mind when I read these books to my kids. There were a few little lines in the book where I was like, oh, that's not a nice thing to say. But, that's pretty much all I offered my children as a historical context. And in that moment, standing on the prairie, when I was having this, as you can hear, what is still a swirl of thoughts and emotions, I had no idea what to do with it. And I took my very excellent mental segmentation skills and just pushed it aside and didn't deal with it at all. Didn't invite my kids into thinking about it, in an age-appropriate way. I don't even think I mentioned it to my husband at the time, but a decade has passed since then, and I have felt that swirl of thoughts and emotions and questions come up time and time again, particularly in recent years when other things I don't know much about, that I have complicated feelings about, that contradict the narrative I have about the country I love, the United States of America, have come up. Juneteenth, the GI Bill, and it being for white veterans primarily and not Black veterans of World War II. Moments like this have led to this complicated set of feelings that I don't know what to deal with. And so as a psychologist, as a social psychologist, this is what we do. We try to understand human behavior, human attitudes, human emotions. And so I decided I wanted to better understand what is our relationship with our past, what is our emotional relationship with our country, and how can I leverage what social psychologists and other social scientists know to offer us tools so we don't do what I did and just push it aside.
Right. And it's one of those moments, and we do this all the time with particularly difficult topics like that. And you look at the moment and say, this is such a beautiful moment. We'll revisit this when we get home.
Right. Time and place. We say this to our kids all the time. Time and place.
Right. We don't need to dampen this amazing trip by talking about this other thing, or again, in the work meeting, or someone says something, the comment, and you go, oh, that seems weird, but I won't call them out in front of everybody, or I won't bring it up right now. I'll make a note and I'll do that later. This is getting a little bit out of order, so hopefully that's okay with you.
There is no order.
Oh, good. Okay. So in the book toward the end, and you talk about how the distance to the past feels longer than the distance into the future. Can you talk a little bit about how that all kind of comes together? Because I think that is something that definitely comes up when we're looking at, I'm definitely going to say something about that tomorrow, but once the act of today has become an act of yesterday, it feels less important to bring up.
Oh my gosh. I just love how you articulated that, by the way.
Thanks.
I am going to re-listen to this and write it down and steal it.
Please do.
I love that. You should write a book.
Hey.
Great. You just did.
Yay. Thanks.
Can't wait to read it. Yeah. So this is a work of Eugene Caruso and co-authors that help me think about what they call these wrinkles in time, these asymmetries, the temporal asymmetries, and how we view the past, the present, and the future. And you would think mathematically, like something that happens, like you said, a day ago versus a day in the future should sit the same in our memory, in also our vision, like how we see those things, our perceptions. But their research shows, theirs and others' research shows that it's actually really different. Like we see the past, as you said, is like farther away. It's also blurrier than the future, which is so counterintuitive because the future thing hasn't happened yet. So I'm literally having to make it up in my imagination versus the past thing has already happened. So you would think that would be clearer. But their studies have actually showed that we have a blurrier vision of the past than the future. We also tend to blame the victim more for the past thing, bad thing, than the victim of the future bad thing. Again, ironic, given that the past thing of the past is already done. And so these differences in how we perceive the past and the present and the future, as you said, can affect kind of the actions we take. It also affects how we understand today. And that for me was the big learning, was understanding today requires me to understand yesterday. There is no way to understand, the society we live in, the business we work in, the neighborhood we live in. None of those things make sense if you don't know what happened literally yesterday and the yesterday before that and the yesterday before that. But if this wrinkle in time makes it blurrier and kind of twists our perception of what happened, and actually kind of just makes us sort of view it as like off to the side. Like, it's sort of like our Zoom rooms, what's out of, we all have gotten really good at keeping things out of the frame. It
Right.
sort of puts things out of the frame, just like in our Zoom windows. And that makes today confusing. We don't then understand what we see today. It's like reading, it's like picking up a book in the middle, and like particularly like a fiction book, and like reading page 100 without pages 1 through 99 and then being like, well, I don't understand what's happening. It was like, right, why would you? And I think that's kind of what happens with the world we live in now. Does that metaphor work? I just came up with that.
Yeah, I like it. It lands for me. I get that.
Good to know.
And I think when I was reading about this in the book, I was really thinking about some work and research that Nuala Walsh has done, and she's been on the show before. She's a co-founding member of the Global Association of Applied Behavioral Scientists. Amazing person. And she has written an article. She wrote an article, and when she was on the show, we talked about whistleblowing at work and how people in the moment would say they were enraged and they were absolutely going to do something about this. And it was a large amount of people saying, I can't believe it. I'm definitely going to go do something. But it's like something's just staggering, like 1% that actually took the next step, which the next step was to go find out how to do something.
Okay. It was like a low stakes next step.
Right. Not like have the meeting and have the conversation. And so I think it might have been that it was like less than 10% that actually then go find and figure something out, even when they were enraged about it. But then now that it's a little bit past. So I'm curious. I'm going to connect with her and see how if she read some of this research as she was working on that, or if this will be, or it might have come out kind of after. I don't know with timelines of things, but
I love that. And that ties to George Lowenstein's work on like hot and cold emotions, that when we're in a hot emotional state of any direction, we're more action oriented.
Right. And you think you're going to feel this way I'll have the same anger and the heat. I think with that, the cold, hot empathy gap and the hot, cold empathy gap, as we kind of go both ways here, my episode I'm going to actually be doing on this, I'm calling Mind the Gap, and it's going to come out, I think, in January. So a little bit after this. But with that, we talk a lot about you're in the cold state and you don't think about how you're going to feel in the hot state, right? So when I'm in the cold state and I say I'm going to be able to resist dessert, and then the dessert comes around and I'm eating it, right? Then that's hard to have an awareness of. I think people talk less about the flip of that, which is what we're saying here is in the hot state, when the thing is happening and I'm upset and I think I'm going to feel this way forever and I'm going to take that action in the same way I feel like I'm going to now. And there's definitely like time discounting layered in here and all these.
Yeah. Affective forecasting. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So then we get but what I think is so interesting and surprising is even just this tiny, tiny bit of distance from the thing and what that drop off level is really fascinating and important to know as we're actually going to do the things we intend to do that are really important in creating that more just future. Again,
that's a brilliant insight. It really is. I mean, that definitely helps me understand these temporal asymmetries in a more richer way because then the next step is system justification theory, or what I've called the good guys win mindset. This is work by John Jost and others. Kicks in because in that what our minds unconsciously do is invest in the status quo even when it doesn't benefit us. It sort of protects the default, or default being the way things are now. And so if, as you just described, I'm in the hot state, I'm outraged. Wait, now it's a day later, I'm in a cold state, and I haven't done anything. Then I've got to create, our minds need to find that coherence. So then system justification theory will do it. Look, I guess things are fine the way they are, and maybe the victim was a little bit to blame anyway. So,
right.
Whoa, nice.
Right. Yeah. And like, was it really that bad? And that's like, and this is when we think about leaving jobs or leaving partners or whatever it is. And you say, the next time this happens, I'm going to do something about it.
I'm on it. Yeah. No, I mean, very relatable. Like with all of these, like my hot state versus cold state to-do list is so different.
For sure. For sure. Well, you mentioned the good guys win theory here. Can you share a little bit about that and how that ties in?
Yeah. So this work by John Jost and colleagues, I think helps us understand the challenges I know I experience when I think about where we are and why we are where we are. So we're in the United States with massive racial disparities on almost every meaningful outcome you can think of. There is a racial disparity in the United States, and I think most people would say that's not the vision. That's not sort of the narrative about the United States. That if we really are a melting pot, it shouldn't be. It should be a little more of like a roll of the dice, kind of who kind of is on which end of a disparity, or whether there are disparities at all, as opposed to something where you can like literally, just bet every time and win the bet. And so if we agree that that's not what most people, would like to see in the country, then the question is sort of how did we get here, and why is it like that? And it's difficult to answer that question if you don't know what happened before, which we just talked about. Like if we don't know what sort of got us here. So if we don't have that knowledge in a meaningful way, our brains have to do something with that disparity sort of confusion. And one explanation is that our brains will justify the systems around us. That's the system justification theory, or what I call the good guys win mindset. Well, this must be the way it should be, or this is sort of how, I guess what's happened in the past has worked out as it should because the good guys usually win. Like that's usually how things work out. The good overcomes evil, and that light, overcomes dark. And And so I guess things are more or less, we could tweak it on the margins, but more or less the way they should be. And so this is unconscious, I suspect, but it kind of leads us to accept things as they are.
Right. And then we have our identity gets tied in with whatever, kind of group that we are associating with in that space. And if they're bad, am I bad? And this kind of juxtaposition. I love what you say about paradox in the book. And, there's a whole chapter about kind of embracing paradox and understanding this duality and talking about, how our brains like to see things in binary versus this like 5-point rating scale, I think was just so well positioned and put together. I know I talked about 500 things there, but can you share a little bit, knowing, of course, everyone can read the book to learn more about all of that? But
yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, this has been one of the things that's been really important in my own mindset, is to think about our brains, natural tendency to want consistency and coherence, to straighten the crooked picture on the wall, to get the puzzle piece to sort of click into place. That's a natural. We know that from so much of the work we're all interested in. But we also know that our brain can handle it if we tell it to, sort of harder cognitive tasks. And one of those things is the cognitive task of accepting that two contradictory statements can both be true. It is, the following statements are both true. The forefathers of the United States had an extraordinary vision, overcame extraordinary odds, wrote extraordinary documents. True. The forefathers of our country, while writing those extraordinary documents with that extraordinary vision of liberty, equality, and justice, most of them were enslaving other human beings. They were torturing them if they tried to escape or resist, and they were separating children from their parents. Also true. And when I kind of had to, I just noticed myself kind of sit back after I said that, because it was like a lot. My brain does not know how to sit with that. And I have to keep reminding myself two contradictory things can be true, not just in history, but in human behavior, in companies, about our customers. Like, it is the nature of the human condition that contradictory things can be true. And so the research by Wendy Smith, Marianne Lewis, and others, that they summarize beautifully in their new book, Both and Thinking, reveals that we can, if we activate what they call a paradox mindset, that is simply remind ourselves that two contradictory things can be true, we actually are more resilient in the face of setbacks. We're more creative when facing a problem. It really unleashes us mentally if we're not just trying to always force things to fit when they don't fit. And so the paradox mindset that you just referred to, I think, is this really powerful tool that we can use when we're trying to understand all these contradictions in our past and our present, when we're trying to think about kind of, well, wait, my company does a lot of great things. My company was built by these heroic founders. My company has been fueled by the love of generations of loyal customers. True. It may also be true that came on the backs of people who were not well served by the vision, or who were not welcome in the company, or who were not viewed as potential customers. Both of those things can be true.
Right. And it makes me think here a lot of the, I guess, proverb maybe, but where it's, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is now. Right. So
I love that.
Yeah. Sure. It would be nice to say, we could look back and say, oh, I wish that if only they would have done something differently. And then don't stop there though. Right. So what's the one little thing that you can do right now that might be the spark of something new and being able to make that change?
Yeah. And that speaks, to all the research we know about our future self, how we tend to deprioritize our future self. And that's probably the kind of the key underpinning of so much of the work in behavioral economics is, what do we do about that future self? And can we sort of bring them into our present day thinking and actions?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I know I mentioned this to you a little bit before we started the interview and the conversation, in that this book was a very interesting personal journey for me as well, which I think everyone should have a very deep personal journey throughout reading this book, for sure, because there's a lot there. In my case, from like sentence one, like where it starts, it resonated with the, Little House on the Prairie stuff, which I never read, perhaps because of this that I'm going to be talking about here. And I don't talk about this a lot, like I said to you. So I am Alaska Native, and the bulk of my family on my mother's side lives on the reservation. It's a little island called Metlakatla in southeast Alaska, and the rest of my family lives in Ketchikan. So I am Tlingit and Tsimshian. And while I was born in a Native hospital in Anchorage, I didn't grow up in Southeast with the family on the reservation. And so I have a little bit of a different history to it, even though I spent my summers there. And so reading about the history of Native Americans, as you talk about in the book, and knowing that Alaska Native had a lot of similar, weren't able to go to school unless you separated from your culture and assimilated into the white culture that was there. And after my grandma died, I had some conversations with family, and all the language that's lost, a lot of culture that's been lost, totem poles that were burned, and things that you learn about through history. And that I found out after my grandma had died that she went to that they had segregated schools and segregated movie theaters, signs that said no dogs and no natives allowed on different buildings and things. And so obviously she never talked about it with me. I didn't know that was a thing. And my grandma was this really strong-willed, super fun, very sparkly person. And I always loved spending time with her. And it's just, when you talk about how the past isn't that far away, like it's not that long. It's just a really difficult thing to realize what, she and my aunts and uncles, extended great aunts and uncles went through in that whole process. So it was just an interesting thing to relate to and be reading about in the book.
Thank you so much, Melina, for sharing that with me. I feel very honored because I know you did tell me this is not something you've typically spoken publicly about your family, and I appreciate that I got to be in conversation with you about it. And I am sorry for the loss of your grandmother. Can I ask you a question about that?
Of course. Yeah.
Because I'm in my book, one of the things I think a lot about is how do we connect the dots between the past and the present? And as I did, lots of reading about that topic, there were lots of ways that I learned about the past kind of spills, if you will, into the present through our words, our beliefs, our trauma, which apparently can literally be carried through our bodies genetically through the epigenetic research that's coming out, and many other ways. So I'd be curious to learn, now that you understand things you didn't know about your grandmother's life, what do you notice in your own family or your community or culture that you hadn't noticed before about how the past is living in the present?
It's been an interesting journey, as I was mentioning to you, because it's something that people don't think about when it's not a part of your background, I guess. But so blood quantum has to do with whether you get to kind of like claim your tribe or not. And in Alaska, there's a corporation called Sea Alaska, and you get to be kind of part of this. And in a way that blood quantum perhaps was used against people to say you have too much native blood, so you don't get to own land or have these different things. It also is you don't have enough, and you can't show the right ties, and so you don't get to be fully part of the the tribe and get benefits and things that might be there if you don't have enough of the blood quantum at these days. It's been an interesting thing reading a lot about this now, as I do care about this. And I don't know how much is because with my son, which most of the audience knows, I have now a 15-month-old, and took the kids up to Alaska for the first time and seeing the totem poles. And my husband has been very interested. My other children, I did not produce those humans. I have stepchildren, but I consider them to be part of the family in the same way. But having that now, this blood quantum question for my blonde-haired, blue-eyed baby as we go up into Alaska, and what does that mean for him, and this tie back into the culture and the society. And when we were just up there a few months ago, and hearing that they're teaching now some of the Tlingit and the Tsimshian language in the schools. And I was able to get some books, Baby Eagle for my son, which is as we're, tying in that kind of background. So wanting that to be a part of his life and more of, for me, it's become really important to preserve that culture as the elders are getting much older, before that gets lost, is something that's important to me. But knowing that I'm so distanced from it, but that I don't want to be, is kind of an interesting quandary for me, conundrum.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. Are there, like you just mentioned, sort of the loss of culture, loss of language. That's a good example of, like, the way our brain will normalize that. Like, well, of course, those things die off, but that's not like, there is no, of course, they are dying off because of the actions that were taken, sadly, by our government, and often sort of more informally, sort of by the dominant culture, that is leading to those things dying off. Like, they would have continued otherwise. And I'm curious, kind of, what within the conversations in your family, like how that's discussed. What is the cause and effect that you understand informally as to why that's happening?
Yeah, I haven't had enough conversations about it yet, to be sure. And I think that there's your book has helped me to take a step forward where I might have let it simmer for a long time in my own mind, and to say, no, that's not okay. It's, time to start having some of these conversations and see what's happening, how the culture is being preserved, and what can we be bringing back, having those connections for, my own family and history in Southeast Alaska. And I think it's, important for everyone kind of around the world. I really like that you shared about the background of, or the show where people are learning about their genealogy, the celebrities, and being able to see the stories that are there, and this question of being a better historian. And I forget what the word was when it's the person who asks the better questions, and
the historiographer, that one.
Yeah.
Historian who studies how we study history.
Yeah. So being able to look for the deeper stories and ask questions, and know that while my grandma is gone, so I can't ask her about her experience, and I believe all of her siblings, we've lost that whole kind of generation at this point. But there are some others that I can be having conversations with, and just taking that time to be more thoughtful and ask good questions, and learn a little bit about what I don't know yet, and what could be lost but is important to save, whether it's art or other forms of culture, or just those stories. It's important. And I think we all have that regardless of what our background is.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, that's definitely what I'm hearing from readers of this book. I say, like, ad nauseum, I'm not a historian, because I'm not, and I'm not even really much of a history buff, honestly. But I am a psychologist, and psychologists are interested in how people relate to others. And that's what all this is like, we all have some family history that either we cherish, or we don't know, or we are embarrassed of, or whatever. We all have that. And sort of understanding kind of how that lives in the present is, I think, really interesting. And it's we absolutely bring that to work with us, and so when we're, asked, you very nicely at the beginning of this conversation asked me to say my name the way I pronounce it and the way my family pronounces it. And that's a very actionable example of something that doesn't happen in most organizations, is we often aren't capturing how people say their names, what their name means to them. And that's a place where a lot of family history sits, is in that name, which for many people was the first decision, or at least the first big decision that was made about them by the people who were going to be critical and central in their childhood. So I think your journey through this book is a very specific to you journey, but also a very universal to everyone who's sort of reflecting upon what past they bring into the present.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you tying that in a little bit. And as you said, I think you and I will have many, many more conversations offline now, because we're sadly coming up on the time that we have allotted here for today. But I appreciate, even like you said, it can be something small, like giving people the room to tell you how they pronounce their name, or to tell a little bit about their story at work, just to learn a little bit more about things that we don't yet know, and embracing that paradox of two things that are opposite can both be true, and to be seeking those out to find as many truths perhaps as we can in our organizations, and find which ones we want to embrace and which ones it's time to let go of.
I love the way you put things. I cannot wait to read your book.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you so much. And Dolly, thank you so much for joining me on the show. I'm guessing we might have you back on at some point to continue the conversation. And again, everyone who wants to hear more from Dolly, come to South by Southwest. You can see her presentation here in March. You can meet us both in person. We'll be there in Austin, and and please do connect. Dolly's going to share a little bit about your newsletter. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'd love to. Yeah. My website is Dolly Chugh. That's DOLLYCHUGH.com. And once you're there, you can also check out my newsletter, which is called Dear Good People. All the past issues are online. It's free. It's zeitgeisty. It's only once a month in your inbox. Readers really seem to enjoy that. I take whatever I'm obsessed with at the moment. Last month it was pickleball. I'm still obsessed with pickleball, by the way.
Yes, we're talking about that next time too.
Oh, good. And then somehow I managed to weave it into some sort of insight or action around being a more inclusive person and manager. And so, plus there's pictures of my puppy often showing up in there. So you can subscribe to Dear Good People at my website. And you can also learn about the rest of my work, including the book we just discussed, A More Just Future.
Perfect. Well, we'll definitely link to that in the show notes. I'm going to go read up on pickleball, which I believe was created and founded just like down the street from my house here in Olympia.
You're right. And in fact, I will tease the piece and say it is the fable of pickleball's origin that I managed to tie back to racial fables and how.
Oh, interesting. I'm checking it out right now, and everyone else should too. We'll put the link for that in the show notes. And again, thank you, Dolly, for joining me on the show today. It's been really great to chat with you.
Same for me, Melina. Thank you for having me.
Thank you again to Dr. Dolly Chugh for joining me on the show today. What got your brain buzzing in today's conversation? For me, as you can probably appreciate, the way this made me feel about my own life and the experiences of my grandmother and the rest of my extended family are really resonating with me lately. As I mentioned on the show, I was already starting to focus a lot on my Native heritage recently, very specifically over the last year or so. And so this book got to me at the right time to kick that all into gear. I'm not sure what actions I will take or what it will all mean, but I care about my culture and those of others. I care about the future and making it one that is just for everyone. I highly recommend that everyone read this book and check out Dolly's newsletter. Both are linked for you in the show notes, along with other related articles and past episodes, as well as ways that you can connect with Dolly. This book matters, and while its content is heavy, it is important. As you look toward the next year, ask yourself what you can do to create a more just future for yourself and every other human out there. Those show notes with easy links are waiting for you within the app you're listening to and at thebrainybusiness.com/247. And thank you again to Dr. Dolly Chugh for joining me on the show today. It was a delight to chat with and learn from you. Join me Tuesday for another Brainy episode of the Brainy Business Podcast. It's going to be a lot of fun. You won't want to miss it. Until then, thanks again for listening and learning with me. And remember to be thoughtful.
Thank you for listening to the Brainy Business Podcast. Molina offers virtual strategy sessions, workshops, and other services to help businesses be more brain-friendly. For more free resources, visit thebrainybusiness.com.